So we are looking at nutrients today. Our goals, our objectives. We want to understand what happens to nutrients after they get into the mouth, how we're going to digest carbohydrates, how we're going to digest fats, how we're going to digest proteins, how they're going to get absorbed. We're going to look at vitamins and minerals, how we absorb those as well. We'll talk a little bit about metabolism at the very end and how we sort of measure and quantify metabolism in a way that makes sense to all of us. We'll talk about how energy is kind of created in the body with ATP again, our three energy systems and how those fuels attach to those systems, right? So nutrients after ingestion, right? When we say ingestion, one thing that's kind of funny about the labeling, I know some people like if Adam were here, right? Adam pays a lot of attention to all the root words and the labeling and stuff. That's his thing, right? But you think about where some of the labeling comes from. We call it our digestive system, but it does a lot of stuff, right? It does digest foods for sure. But it's also in charge of the ingestion process. I mean, it's a big tube and big empty hole running through the middle of our body, right? So thanks to that, we can ingest it, right? Then we digest it and then we absorb it. And we also eliminate any of our waste products. So, once we're talking about that, we're looking at, once we're talking about the digestive system, we can't do it without talking about all of it, right? So once nutrients are absorbed, then we've got all the nutrients in, and all we have to do is get rid of the waste products. The nutrients are then going to go do all the magic that they're supposed to do. We're going to make them part of our body, and all of this that we're supposed to do to actually get them moving and working along and stuff. So if we look at sort of our organization here, right, our GI tract, gastrointestinal tract, which I like better, but we can always call it the digestive system. You see, we got the mouth here, right? We're going to do the ingestion by getting the food in. And then there's going to be some digestion right there. I mean, even just the process of chewing, we call that mechanical processing. We're mechanically busting up stuff, making it smaller. Then we're also going to do some chemical processing here, right? Because our saliva is going to help break things down using enzymes and stuff like that. We'll swallow that food down. It'll travel into our stomach where it'll sit for a little while and get most of the chemical processing done, where proteins become amino acids, carbohydrates get a little bit further broken down into glucose molecules. The only thing we don't do much of here in the stomach is digest fats. Fats, for the most part, kind of stay the same, but immediately after it leaves the stomach, it goes into the small intestine right here. And then your liver, which is hard at work making bile, right? The liver puts bile into the gallbladder, and then the gallbladder drops it off into our small intestine at the very beginning. So we got the beginning of the small intestine, and we just dropped food off from the stomach. So that's where all that bile is going to break down our fats. And now we don't have fats anymore. We have individual fatty acids. We don't have proteins anymore. We have amino acids. We don't have carbohydrates anymore. We have glucose. And then we have vitamins and minerals, right? And so those things are going to work their way through the small intestine and, keep working its way and kind of looping around. I'm not sure what direction I'm going currently, but eventually it'll make its way all the way to the end right here. And by the time it gets to there, most of the nutrients have been absorbed by the bloodstream, right? Glucose went through little glucose holes. They got into our bloodstream. Amino acids went through amino acid holes. Fatty acids went through fatty acid holes. And so they're all picked up by our they go through the membrane into our bloodstream. And so they're all getting transported wherever they need to go. Now, we've got a lot of vitamins and minerals that we also need to absorb as well. Now, the fat-soluble vitamins, A, D, E, and K, they all got absorbed with the fat. That's why they're fat-soluble, right? So they're already in the bloodstream. But your vitamin C and all of your B vitamins, which are water-soluble, that's the one thing we haven't really talked about absorbing yet. I mean, some water is certainly getting in through the small intestine, but some of it's not. And so that's where the large intestine comes, this little victory lap right around the outside here. So all that water is going to get absorbed into our bloodstream. And along with it is going to come a lot of our minerals and a lot of our B vitamins and vitamin C. So all the water soluble stuff. So this is where we're going to pull the water out of what that wet, soupy mixture that kind of used to be food, right? And eventually, so much water is going to come out of it that it's going to become formed into a solid, and then it'll work its way out of the body from there, and we'll eliminate any of that waste, right? So that's kind of digestion in a nutshell, right? If we define it, we're going to say it's the segregation of food into their basic components so that they can be absorbed by the walls in our gastrointestinal tract. Basically, a simpler way of saying that is we break food down so small that it's literally able to pass straight through the walls of our body into our bloodstream. Because again, as a reminder, we are all human donuts. And, when we are, digesting food, it's not necessarily in our body yet, right? It has to pass through the actual, digestive system into our bloodstream. Now it's in our body, right? So the GI tract consists of the stomach, which actually, hold on, that's where I wanted to show the video. I was just going to keep talking. All right, crash course, digestive tract. And we want this one. I totally I had it all planned.
Oh, hi.
Oh, wait, this is the one that we already watched, right?
The absorption of...
Other one, this one.
We all have our reasons for eating nachos.
Is this the one that I wanted? This is the one we didn't watch, right? Where he's eating nachos. We watched the milkshake one. Yeah. All right.
We all have our reasons for eating nachos at 3 in the afternoon. I happen to have my own. And don't ask, it's personal. But more generally, we all eat any kind of food to accomplish two simple things: to obtain the energy we need to stay alive, and to get the raw materials required for building all of our tissues and stuff. That's because when it comes down to it, both you and the food you eat contain those two same things. Both you and food are made of stuff, by which I mean matter, made of certain kinds of atoms, and both you and food have energy stored in the bonds between those atoms. So all living things need to take in stuff and energy and convert it into slightly different stuff and energy. And you can get some of the things you need pretty easily, like in order to get oxygen for respiration, to unleash the chemical energy in your food, you just have to inhale. But you can't just breathe in the stuff you need to build DNA or actin or a phospholipid bilayer. So, how does your body really acquire stuff? That's where the nachos come in. This cheesy, crunchy dish is made of all different kinds of biological matter like carbohydrates and fat and protein, and it contains a certain, probably shocking amount of calories, which is how we measure energy stored in the chemical bonds in food. So if I take like a 100-calorie bite of nachos, which probably with this much cheese wouldn't even be a very big bite, I can convert the chemical energy stored in those carbohydrates and proteins and fats to feed my muscle and heart cells and maybe like walk a mile, an activity that happens to use about 100 calories. But I can't just swallow the nachos and watch the lump of them travel straight to my heart or leg muscles. In order to actually use this food, I have to convert the biological matter into something my body can work with on the cellular level, which, as you know, is pretty darn tiny. And the work of converting the stuff in food into the stuff that's in my body is done by my digestive system. Human digestion occurs in 6 main steps, some of which you are intimately familiar with, others less so. But every step of the way, your body is working to reduce all the different kinds of molecules in food into their tiniest and most basic forms. The first step is probably everybody's favorite. When it comes to what your digestive system ultimately does, just think of it as a sort of disassembly line. You could have an order of nachos with the works. I'm talking beef and onions and sour cream and slices of jalapeno, and your digestive system will deconstruct it, both mechanically and chemically, one step at a time. It's gotta do this because your cells work best with materials that are in their most basic form. Your digestive system reduces food to that level in 2 main ways: by physically smashing it to smithereens and by bathing them, as much as it can, in enzymes. Enzymes are proteins that living things use as catalysts to speed up chemical reactions. When used in digestion, enzymes break down the large molecules in your food into the building blocks that your cells can actually absorb. Those large molecules are called biological molecules, also known as macromolecules, and everything that you eat, I hope, is at least partially made of them. And there are 4 main kinds. You got the lipids, the carbohydrates, the proteins, and the nucleic acids. Each possesses its own density of chemical potential energy, or caloric value. Like, for example, 1 gram of carbohydrate contains about 4 calories, while a gram of fat contains about 9 calories. But many of these biological molecules are polymers, or sequences of smaller molecules, and your cells aren't really equipped to take them up whole. What your body traffics in are those polymers' individual components, called monomers, and there are 4 main kinds of those too: fatty acids, sugars, amino acids, and nucleotides. The simple idea behind the whole digestive system is to break down the polymers of macromolecules in your food into the smaller monomers that your cells can use to build their own polymers, while also getting the energy they need. And what your body needs to build at any given moment is always changing. Maybe you need new fat stores so you can have energy to run a marathon, or new actin and myosin to build bigger muscles, or more DNA so you can replace the skin cells you scraped off your knee when you fell, or more enzymes so you can digest more food to get more building materials. To meet your body's constant and constantly shifting demands, your digestive system requires a lot of organs that perform a lot of specific tasks to break down and absorb the right nutrient at the right time. Now, I'm quite sure that you're familiar with the key players here. They're the hollow organs that form the continuous tube that is your alimentary canal, aka the gastrointestinal tract, which runs from your mouth to your anus. It's worth pointing out that these organs are hollow because you are basically hollow too. Your digestive tract is really just one unbroken insulated tunnel of outside that just happens to run through your body and it's open at both ends. You're a donut. So the layer of stratified squamous and columnar epithelial cells that line your tract is actually a barrier between the outside world and your inside world, but it's a barrier that allows for the selective movement of materials between them. It's these hollow organs that do the actual moving, digesting, and absorbing of food, and they include your mouth, pharynx, esophagus, stomach, and small and large intestines. In your mouth, in your esophagus, and at the other end of things at your anus, you have stratified squamous epithelial tissue, just like your epidermis, to help resist the abrasive action of, like, chewing like corn chips, maybe. From your stomach on down, though, the inner GI tract is lined with simple columnar epithelial cells which secrete all sorts of stuff and which absorb and process various nutrients. Most of these columnar cells secrete mucus, which lubricates everything and protects your cells from being digested by your own digestive enzymes. So the innermost epithelial layer of the tube is known as the mucosal layer, and it contains some connective tissue as well, which supplies it with blood. Surrounding the mucosal layer is the submucosal layer, made of loose areolar connective tissue, which helps provide the elasticity that the tube needs when you eat a whole pizza in one sitting, and it contains more blood vessels. And outside that, you have the muscularis external layer, which, as you might guess, is where you find the muscles responsible for moving food through your tube. Beyond these layers, the GI tract gets tons of support from the accessory digestive organs like your teeth and your tongue, your gallbladder, salivary glands, liver, and pancreas. They're kind of like a pit crew, and they mostly help by secreting various enzymes that help take apart food as it comes down the tube. Together, these two groups on the digestive disassembly line work in 6 steps to destroy your food and release and recycle its nutrients. First, of course, you gotta introduce the food to your digestive system. What you know as eating or ingestion is basically just creating a bulk flow of nutrients from the outside world into your tissues. This is where the work of disassembly begins, in your face hole, which scientists call your mouth. Now, we're gonna get into the details of what happens here another time, but remember that food disassembly is both mechanical and chemical, so your teeth pulverize the bite of nacho or whatever, while your salivary glands begin that food's hours-long enzyme bath. But the food at this point is not nearly micro enough to be of any use to your cells, so you have to move that mush further down your tube. This stage is called propulsion, and its initial mechanism is swallowing, which, as you know, is a voluntary action, but then it's quickly turned over to the involuntary process of peristalsis. In peristalsis, the smooth muscles of the walls of your digestive organs take turns contracting and relaxing to squeeze food through the lumen, or cavity, of your alimentary tract. Waves of peristalsis continue through the esophagus, stomach, and intestines, and they're so strong that even if you were hanging upside down while eating your lunch and drinking your tea, the food would still soldier on, fighting gravity, and eventually make it to its final destination. Don't do that, though. There's other reasons why you shouldn't be upside down. Anyway, all of this shipping and handling mechanically breaks down the food even more, and even after it goes through the stomach and its gastric acid, the mechanical work still continues once it reaches your small intestine, as more smooth muscle segments push the food back and forth to keep it crumbling up. The goal of all this pulverization is to increase the surface area of that bite of food by breaking it down into increasingly tiny pieces to prepare it to encounter more enzymes in step 4, chemical digestion. Really, the actual process of digestion only occurs when the main action becomes more chemical than mechanical. And here, the accessory digestive organs, namely the liver, pancreas, and gallbladder, secrete enzymes into the alimentary canal where they ambush the mush and break it down into its most basic chemical building blocks. Like I said before, our cells prefer to do business in the basic currency of monomers like amino acids, fatty acids, and simple sugars, and digestion allows for the absorption of those nutrients as they pass from the small intestine into the blood by both active and passive transport. Once those nutrients are absorbed by your cells, you can finally use the energy inside of them or use them to build new tissues. The absorption of the nutrients is the goal of the entire process. But of course, it is not the end of it. Once your body has sucked out all the nutrients at once, indigestible substances like fiber are escorted out of your body. Yeah, I'm talking about pooping, or defecation. And that is the end of the digestive line, unless you are a capybara or one of the other animals who make sure that they get the most out of their lunch by giving the whole process another round and practicing coprophagia, aka eating their own poop. Now, you should notice here that some of the processes of digestion occur in just one place and are the job of a single organ, like hopefully you're only ingesting through your mouth and eliminating from the large intestine. But most of these 6 steps require cooperation among multiple organs. For example, both mechanical and chemical digestion start in the mouth and continue through the stomach and small intestines, and some chemical breakdown continues in the large intestine thanks to our little bacterial farm there. Over the next couple of weeks, we're going to take you and your nachos on a stroll through your digestive system and see who's doing what, where, how, and why. But for now, I got some nachos to finish, so I gotta go. And eating those nachos, as you learned today, will provide me with energy and raw materials by first ingesting something nutritious, propelling it through my alimentary canal where it will be mechanically broken down and chemically digested by enzymes until my cells can absorb their monomers and use them to make whatever they need. And eventually, there will be pooping. Thanks to all of our Patreon patrons.
All right, so let's go ahead and work our way through this, right? So our stomach, like he said in the video, is a good way to kind of describe it. It's this big pouch, right? And it's full of stomach acid, which is mostly like going to break things down because it is very acidic, like it was mentioned, right? It's an extremely, extremely acidic area. So because of that, like that's going to help bust things up for sure. But also there's a lot of like digestive enzymes in there, right? So for instance, we have one called pepsin. The bond that holds amino acids together, you know, you get a bunch of amino acids together, you get a protein. The bond that holds those together is called a peptide bond. So pepsin breaks peptide bonds, right? So there's a lot of like acidity that's going to take place that's helping with that, but also like those enzymes, right? So it's filled with hydrochloric acid and other materials that break food into this wet, goopy mixture that we call chyme. It's not really food anymore. It's just this wet, nasty soup of nutrients, right? That's your chyme. If you've ever gotten really, really sick, and it's that is often chyme that you are seeing. Then we've also got our small intestine. This is the portion of the GI tract where, you know, a lot of digestion and absorption is going to take place. There's a lot of digestion that still does take place in the small intestine. It's not like your small intestine is actually doing it. What's interesting is your small intestine is where some digestion takes place, like, you know, the digestion of fats, right? Taking fats and breaking them down into fatty acids. That's thanks to bile. Your small intestine didn't make that bile, but it is where it gets mixed with the bile. So we have a lot of accessory organs here at the small intestine, right? So it's going to perform a bit of digestion with some enzymes that are created by the liver and the pancreas. And that's where like some of the breakdown takes place. But for the most part, when I want you to think of the small intestine, I want you to think of the process of absorption, right? But you've got your liver there, which makes bile. Bile breaks down fats. You get your pancreas there, which creates what's called pancreatic amylase that helps break down some carbohydrates and a few extra amino acids if they happen to survive your stomach, although hopefully not. And then you've also got your gallbladder in there, and your gallbladder doesn't actually make anything. It is just simply there to store bile in case you have like a really fatty meal. So your liver makes the bile and it just kind of holds onto it in the gallbladder. It's one of the reasons why you can take your gallbladder out and it's not really that big a deal. I mean, it is, but at the same time, like you can live a perfectly healthy life without a gallbladder. So this is going to do mostly a lot of absorption. And the real reason we're doing all that absorption is because of your intestinal villi. These villi are these little tiny rod projections that, this is where the actual absorption takes place. So if you look inside of a villi, you can see there's all these little blood vessels in there, right? And so nutrients are passing through this very thin wall, and that's how they get into your bloodstream, and then they get sucked over into the rest of the body, go to your heart pumps it around, and nutrients get to wherever they need to go to repair things, right? So villi, your small intestine is covered in these little rods, right? And those rods are filled with blood vessels, and that's where that stuff gets picked up. Eventually, that food's going to drop into your large intestine, which is the very final portion of that digestive tract. And it's going to pick up any undigested or any semi-digested foods there, any unabsorbed nutrients and things like that, and absorb all of the water and things like that into your actual bloodstream. Now, there is one more little organ there called your appendix. Your appendix is a little accessory organ as well. Anybody in here had their appendix removed, by the way? Do I have anybody with anybody in here who's sans appendix?
Yeah, I had mine removed.
Really?
Same.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
honestly, it's one of those things that isn't like the biggest deal in the world. Like it is kind of an organ. We used to think we didn't really know what it did. Like we were like, I don't know, it's there, but we're not sure what to do with it. And nowadays, what we think it is it's kind of like a USB stick, where you store your gut bacteria. So if you ever get like really sick off of like food poisoning or something like that, and then your digestive tract is like, all right, well, and it just slams that eject button and it's either ejecting this way or it's ejecting that way, right? You're going to lose a lot of gut bacteria because your body's not deciding to keep anything. It's literally just getting rid of everything. And you need that gut bacteria in your large intestine to help you break down any undigested foods that happen to somehow survive the stomach and the small intestine. Your large intestine usually takes care of those things. So my advice to anybody who's ever had their appendix removed is basically just go pick up a probiotic anytime you're feeling, a little like gastrointestinal distress. Those probiotics are basically a whole bunch of just different, bacterial enzymes, like good bacteria. And you're just going to like take that and that's basically your, hopefully restarting all your cultures. You know what I mean? Which is always my advice, but only if you get sick. I mean, honestly, you don't really need it other than that. It's a backup, it's a copy of these things. Those things will naturally reproduce and keep themselves alive without that. And so that's why, the appendix, not the end of the world, although I'm sure, man, that surgery must have not, and like the process of the appendicitis, that must have been rough. So yeah, that's what your appendix is, a little accessory organ that houses bacterial cultures. Now, in the large intestine, last thing we got to mention here is that you are going to absorb a lot of water and any remaining electrolytes, as well as B vitamins. So electrolytes, what are those? They got them in Gatorade and stuff. Yes, well, your electrolytes, let's look this up here. Let's take a look at what our main electrolytes actually are. The way they kind of work is, if you had like, let's say like a little bit of water or something like that, there's not actually going to be a lot of a good electric current running through that water, unless you were to fill that water with like sodium, and particularly, it's not quite what I'm looking for. Electrolyte biology. Sodium and potassium are the big ones. There's some other electrolytes there as well, like chlorine kind of counts as one and kind of acts like one a little bit. But you can see here, right? Na, that's sodium, Cl, that's chlorine, and K is potassium. So these are your three main like electrolytes you're going to use in your body. Calcium can even act as one a little bit in some cases. There's definitely other electrolytes out there. But when we say something is an electrolyte, what we mean is that it's an ion that has a charge, right? So you can see there's little positives and negatives here, right? The potassium is positive, the sodium is positive, the chlorine is negative. But here's the thing, like potassium is actually more positive than sodium is, right? And so because of that, if you flip them back and forth, they act like little batteries, right? So imagine like I've got two batteries here, right? And I mean like we're talking AA batteries, okay? So I've got one right here, and I got another one right here, right? And then it's gonna have its little like positive end, and it's got to have a little negative end there, right? So there we go. Now I've got two batteries, right? Like this, and there's the positive end up here, and the positive end down here, I guess. And then over here, I've got my negative ends, right? And then there's my other negative end. So there we go, right? Now I've got batteries. Now, if I put a battery in a remote control like this, it's going to work just fine, right? By the way, this explanation is going to I feel like this explanation is going to disappear soon. And like, there's going to be a point in time where like everything nowadays is chargeable or like wireless chargeable. And I'm going to be trying to explain batteries to people. And I'm like, I don't know what a battery is. And I'm going to be like, oh my God. It's gonna like in 20 years time, like I'm not going to be able to use this example anymore and it'll wreck me. But so this is kind of our battery. Now, if I were to put it like this, right? Like let's say I put this in a remote, like not that one, like this, right? And now I've got both the positive sides on one side, and I've got the negative one over here. That if I put that in a remote, nothing's going to happen. It's not going to function properly. And the reason why is because let's just imagine this positive stuff here. There's a lot of it on this side, right? So there's just like a lot of, kind of positive energy like over here on this side of the battery, right? And so like all the positive stuff is over here. And then there's a lot of positive stuff over here as well, like on the other battery, right? And so it's not having much of an effect, right? All the positive stuff. And we'll go ahead and put the negative stuff on the other side because it's the opposite, and that's where we're going to keep it in our little battery example here. So we'll say like, let's say this is our negative stuff over here, right? So there's our negative bit, right? So what's happening right now, the reason this isn't working very well, like the reason I'm not able to really get much current out of these two things is because there's no reason for the positive and the negative stuff to move around, right? All the positive stuff is grouped up with the positive stuff, all the negative stuff is grouped up with the negative stuff, and everything's happy, right? And so it's not really working very well, right? If I were to put this in a TV remote, it wouldn't do anything because like there's no electrons moving back and forth. The remote control can't capture any of those electrons to do stuff. But if I took it and I went like this and I flipped it around, right? And now I've got positive and negative. What happens is like these want to go this way and get over there, and these want to go this way and get over there. But then all of a sudden when that happens, right, everything's mixed up. So then it also kind of wants to go back this way, and then this one wants to go back this way. And so it just creates this like constant little like loop of energy kind of going back and forth and back and forth. So electrons are just pouncing back and forth like crazy. And because electrons are moving back and forth like crazy, the electronics that I want to use, my remote control, I hit a power button or something like that, I can capture some of those electrons and I can use it to power my remote control. And that's basically how batteries work, which is a really simple explanation that I'm no expert on batteries or anything, but here's where that kind of comes back to regular old biology, right? Your body does the exact same thing. You've got your sodium and your potassium and you flush them back and forth, right? So you create a cell wall that separates the two, sodium on one side, potassium on the other, and your body, oops, actually that was the perfect picture right there. And you can see potassium moves this way, sodium moves this way, and so they move back and forth, and the electrons get captured and allow our body to create electric signals. And that's how your neurons actually work. We look at like the neuron and how it's going to function to create electricity. It's just flushing sodium and potassium from one side to the other. And so sodium rushes in, potassium rushes out. Is this going to animate? I wanted it to. There we go. And it looks something kind of like this, right? So all these little like positive things here, and we get some over here. They flush to one side. And so what ends up happening is you've got a bunch of positive stuff on the outside, a bunch of negative stuff on the inside. And they're going to flip, and it's going to travel from one place to another. And it looks something kind of like this, right? See, the blue rushes in for a second, then rushes back out. It's kind of moving a little fast, but what that does is that's creating electricity. So when I say something is an electrolyte, what I mean is I'm talking about sodium and potassium. And you have lots of sodium and potassium running around your body right now, and you use it to create electricity, which is how your neurons talk to each other and talk to your muscles and do everything that it is that we do, right? So that's why we need to make sure we're definitely absorbing our sodium and our potassium. And that's why those minerals are part of our diet, along with chlorine, which makes up our hydrochloric acid, magnesium, which also acts as an electrolyte, but aids in the digestion of things like copper, which aids in the digestion of iron, which aids in making hemoglobin, so it's like, oh my gosh, like there's all these different things that we need because they help us interact with other things. And that's the process of keeping a body alive, right? We need to make sure we get all these nutrients in. Now, we can't do any of this without energy, which is why we move immediately into talking about our essential nutrients. And the first one we talk about is carbohydrates, our body's favorite source of energy, right? So carbohydrates are going to come in. We see here 4 different varieties. We've got monosaccharides, mono from the word meaning one, that's a single sugar molecule, like glucose. We got disaccharides, that's a double, di from the word meaning two, that's a double sugar molecule. We got now here's the thing. I will say I have not mentioned one this entire module. There is also oligosaccharides. Oligo is a word that means somewhere between 3 and 10. And then poly means, by definition, many. So like poly is many. So an oligosaccharide to me is a polysaccharide. And like nobody ever mentions this one in the middle. So we go 1, 2, and then we're just like, okay, lots, So I didn't even put it in your notes here, but if anybody reads this and you're like, what the heck is an oligosaccharide? It's 3 to 10. High fructose corn syrup is an oligosaccharide. It lands in it's not quite as simple as a disaccharide, but it's not quite complicated enough to be a polysaccharide. So it's in the middle. Don't worry about it. It's never going to come up again. But polysaccharides are lots, right? Now, the examples of polysaccharides that we've got are our starches, like what you would find in a potato or rice or bread, and glycogen, which is the version of a potato, rice, and bread in our body, right? Like it's a wet, soupy carbohydrate that we store in our liver and we store it in our muscles. That way, if I don't eat for a couple hours, my body can release those things and I can have carbohydrates to keep me moving. And then we've got fiber, and fiber is like a starch that's super, super complicated and also like can't be digested. So the fiber is the stuff that we actually can't break down. Now, talking about breaking stuff down, if we're talking about like the disaccharides or the polysaccharides, right? Carbohydrates are very easily broken down with enzymes, particularly salivary amylase. Amylase is an enzyme that digests carbohydrates. Salivary amylase is the one that's found in your spit. So that helps you start breaking down carbohydrates in the mouth immediately. Now, it's not that strong. It's not able to take like a big complicated carbohydrate and make it glucose, but it can make it disaccharides. It can get it down to a double sugar molecule. It can't get it all the way down to 1, but it can break it down into double sugar molecules. Then it's too small and it doesn't have much of an effect. So we say it splits the poly, the many, into double, okay? We got pancreatic amylase. Pancreatic amylase made by the pancreas, that's the one that takes the doubles and breaks it down into singles. So then we've got individual sugar molecules. Once we've got singles, they go sucked right into the bloodstream. Now they can be metabolized for energy later. We also have what are called our brush border disaccharides. Brush border disaccharides basically live, it's in the name. They live on the border of like a little villi. And when a sugar that's a double sugar molecule brushes against them, it breaks it into single sugar molecules. So they're digestive enzymes that are produced by your cell walls in the small intestine They take any double sugar molecules that didn't get broken down by the pancreatic amylase, and they split it into single sugar molecules. Your body cannot absorb anything that's not a single, well, it cannot absorb any carbohydrates that are not single sugar molecules. Otherwise, they're too big, they're too complicated, they can't get through the wall. How do we actually get those things into our bloodstream? Right? Like, what is the process? Like, I keep describing it as like slots, right? You get a little carbohydrate slot and sugars can pass through that, right? At least single sugars can. Well, that description is describing what we call passive diffusion. Molecules move from one area of high concentration to an area of low concentration, which you guys will remember from talking about the respiratory system. Stuff always moves from where there's a lot of stuff to where there's very little stuff. Well, if you got a lot of sugars on one side and you got some empty holes that those sugars can pass through, and you got no sugars on the other side, sugar's going to move right through the wall into our bloodstream. And that's that one. Now, there is also like, facilitated diffusion. That's actually where little protein carriers will grab something and carry it from one side to the other. Remember earlier I mentioned fat-soluble vitamins and water-soluble vitamins? Fat-soluble vitamins need to be carried by fat across the membrane. It's like, if you're going to a club and your friends got tickets and you don't, it's like, I'm with them, like you just kind of hang out and then you get through the door, right? That's kind of what facilitated diffusion really is, right? It's where, a molecule of something else will carry another substance across a membrane. Fat-soluble vitamins do that. Same thing, very similar to like active transport. Active transport is also something carrying from one side to another. Facilitated diffusion is more like something's getting pushed. Active transport is something's being carried. And then there's endocytosis. Endocytosis is really cool. You're not going to do much of this in your digestive tract, but you will do this in your body a lot. This is how viruses actually get destroyed. Endocytosis looks like this. So if I find an endocytosis GIF here, it's where basically a cell will sort of wrap itself around another material, and then just it kind of flops itself around it, and then it just eats it. So honestly, this is actually pretty good. So there's a little bit like a little something here, and then it'll just kind of like close itself around, and then it'll dissolve it. That's how your immune system works, actually. Your white blood cells just kind of shimmy up. Actually, yeah, they'll shimmy up next to something else, and then they'll just kind of a very slow moving GIF this time. Is this ever gonna happen? Come on, internet. Maybe we'll do this one. There we go. So you can see like these materials here. It'll kind of work its way by, and then it'll basically like open up and go and eat it. And that's endocytosis. Oh, there we go. That's actually even better. Right? So that's really cool. It's my favorite, but not something that we see in the actual digestive tract that often. Now, once your carbohydrates are in your blood, right? So they've passed through the wall, they're in your bloodstream, right? Now they are going to go immediately through the liver. The first place that blood travels through, the blood vessels, once they go from your small intestine, the first place they go through your liver. And your liver is going to detoxify anything. This is why your liver gets so damaged by drinking things like alcohol, for instance, because alcohol gets into the bloodstream, goes through the liver first, and your liver's like, oh my gosh, how do we process all this? And it makes what we call alcohol dehydrogenase. It's this thing that breaks down alcohol. And then like basically turns it into sugar. And then it just acts like sugar after that. But then you're left with all this leftover like glycerol is what's called, all this leftover alcohol that you have to like then get through your kidneys and you have to pee it out. Or it's still flowing through your bloodstream, and that's by the way, this takes a massive amount of water, and that's why like you get hungover because you're so dehydrated. But that's alcohol. So carbohydrates go straight through the liver because everything goes straight through the liver. Now, from there, a lot of that sugar is going to get sucked out of the bloodstream and go into the liver, and it's going to become glycogen. Glycogen, again, is our storage form of glucose in the body so that we can release that glucose anytime that we need to be able to anytime that we need to be able to have energy production, even if we haven't eaten something, right? So we have stored energy in the form of glycogen. Now we also get insulin, right? Insulin, not necessarily in your liver. That's going to be made by your pancreas, but that's actually going to be released by the pancreas, and it's going to tell, that sugar to leave your blood and go into your cells. So we need to make glycogen. And it's like, oh, our sugar levels are high. We release insulin from the pancreas. The pancreas then tells the insulin then tells all the sugar to go into the liver to become glycogen. So there's definitely like a really strong connection between like your insulin and your liver, right? And that's another reason why like liver disease is common amongst diabetics, right? By the way, the receptors that are responsible for that are called your GLUT1 and GLUT4s. We don't ever talk about this, but those are the membranes necessary to actually attach to that. GLUT1 carries glucose into your muscle cells. GLUT4 transports glucose and turns it into glycogen, or it turns it into fat when your glucose and insulin levels are both really high. GLUT4 is the one that is sort of responsible for the abdominal fat that we experience. Because that's the thing, right? If my glycogen stores are full and insulin's telling all that sugar to get converted and stored, it can't store it as glycogen anymore, right? So it just turns into triglycerides, turns into fat, and then we store that instead. And that's why high sugar foods are so bad for us, and particularly bad for like people who are trying to change their body composition. You're trying to lose weight. It's how carbohydrates became the villain in the whole weight loss conversation. Carbohydrates are not bad for us, but sugars very much are, right? And even though carbohydrates become sugars, they become sugars slowly, which is fine. It's when the sugars are already processed and they just enter our bloodstream instantly. That's what causes us problems. Like if a here's the thing. Let's say I got two clients and they both consume 300 grams of carbohydrates per day. That's not really that big a deal. But if one of them is consuming 300 grams and it's sugar, and the other one's consuming 300 grams and it's all starches, this is just already broken down. It enters their bloodstream instantly. This person over here, they have to digest those carbohydrates because they're these big complicated starches, and they have to turn those starches into sugar, which takes time and energy. And that's why this person's probably going to have like a lot of problems with obesity and diabetes and things like that. And this person who ate the same number of carbohydrates per day doesn't have any health problems. That's why we like complex carbs instead of simple ones. Love potatoes, love bread, love rice. All of them are actually very good, in my opinion. But candy, sugars, sodas, things like that, not so much. So if things enter the bloodstream too quickly and the glycogen stores aren't emptied out, then that sugar is going to get converted into triglycerides. What's a triglyceride? Well, it's a fat, right? And usually when we're referring to triglycerides, the one that you guys are familiar with are going to be saturated fats are examples of triglycerides. Unsaturated fats are examples of triglycerides. Even trans fats are a triglyceride, right? Now, the one we make in our body is mostly the saturated stuff, right? Like when we make fat, it's like we're an animal, right? And it's like buying steak with a lot of like fat on it. It's very high in saturated fat because that's the fat that animal bodies sort of make, right? So a triglyceride is a 3 fatty acid molecule. A diglyceride is a double fatty acid molecule. We don't talk about that too often in terms of looking at a nutrition label. They don't mention it, but that's like part of the chemistry there as well. That's what we refer to as a phospholipid. Your omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids are good examples of those diglycerides, and they can be really healthy. You've got monoglycerides, which are individual fatty acids all by themselves, right? And then if you were to remove the glycerol backbone, you would have a free-form fatty acid. And a free fatty acid is what's going to be used directly for metabolizing. So a free fatty acid can be converted into energy very, very, very quickly, as long as it happens in the mitochondria, because it does require the Krebs cycle. So when we're looking at it, you can see like the way we digest our fats, we do some of it in the mouth, which is why fats fatty foods taste so good. Some of it happens in the stomach, but not much, about 30%. And then most of it's going to happen in the small intestine because your gallbladder and your pancreas are going to break those things down. So the lingual lipase, that's the one that happens in the mouth. Gastric lipase is the stuff that happens in the stomach, and the pancreatic lipase is what happens in the small intestine. And then, of course, the gallbladder. And then the last type of fats that we've got that we consume all the time. And remember, when I say fats like in food, it's a big mixture of all these things. Steak is going to have triglycerides, diglycerides, monoglycerides, and cholesterol in it. It's going to have all of them, right? Olive oil is going to have all of them, you know. It's a big mixture of all these sort of different sort of forms all together. There's just different levels of each. Like, for instance, olive oils have a lot of triglycerides in the form of the unsaturated variety. Animal foods have a lot of triglycerides in the saturated variety. And then there's cholesterol. There's going to be a lot of cholesterol in things that are high in saturated fat. And there's going to be usually low cholesterol in things that are more unsaturated fat. So those cholesterols are what we call from the fat, proteins. There's actually a little bit of protein in them, very small levels. So these are substances that are transported by the lipids in the blood. You've got the low density stuff and you've got the high density stuff. They look kind of like this. You can see if we look at LDL versus HDL cholesterol, they look differently. They look different. Where's my good picture? Looking for the structure, please. Come on, internet. There we go. So you look here and you can see like there's a lot of protein in the high density stuff, these little blue bubbles, right? And there's very little protein in the low density stuff. These are big globules, right? So we're going to find more of that saturated triglyceride storage in the low density stuff. We're going to find more protein in the high density stuff. So where do we get these foods from? Where do we get the good stuff that's high and dense that cleans out our blood vessels? And how do we avoid the bad stuff that kind of clogs up our blood vessels? Well, the HDL is going to be found in oils and things like that. So like olive oils, for instance, if we look at like good fats versus bad fats, which is not how I like to usually explain things, but it works really well for this lesson. So to look here, right, our good fats are the stuff that are very oily naturally, right? Fish has a lot of oil in it, avocado or lots, and like lots of like nuts and seeds and even peanut butter, right? Whereas bad fats, we're seeing things like solid fats when they're at room temperature, animal proteins, butters, and then like the fats you're going to find in like preservatives for like chips and baked goods and stuff, right? So that's our, that's kind of what we're looking at. Fried foods and things like that are very high in low density cholesterol. Healthy oils are very high in high density cholesterol. Then we got our proteins, right? We've talked about proteins. These are, the different structures in the body. We've got a bunch of amino acids coming together, right? And so when we look at amino acid, it kind of looks like this, right? It's this big, we always draw it as like I'm sorry, not amino acid. We look at a protein, it's just like a big long chain like this, right? And then you can break apart that chain and call it denaturing. And then we can actually split it up because the actual chain looks something kind of like this, right? There's the big folded up, and then we stretch it out like this, right? And then we just bust it. So this is an amino acid right here. That's another one. That's another one. And we just split them all up. And that's what digestion actually is. So then we've got individual amino acids, and they can get absorbed by the digestive tract there, right? So amino acids are going to be absorbed into our body, and they go into what we call the amino acid pool. And basically, it's just a bunch of free-floating amino acids that kind of live in your body. It's a collection of them. And that allows you to be like, hey, I need tryptophan over here in the calves because we went on a hike yesterday. So your body can grab from the amino acid pool and get that tryptophan over there. And then all of a sudden, you've got every amino acid you need, and your body can make new muscle cells, right? So the amino acid pool is basically a collection of these 20 amino acids in very high levels so that your body can take from that and build everything up and help you make actual new proteins, skin, muscle, bones, hair, DNA, enzymes, whatever protein you need, guys. So a lot of that is also stored in your liver. Makes sense. Again, the liver is sort of the first place that everything goes, right out the digestive tract. But anytime your body has like any amino acids it doesn't use, leftovers, well, they're going to go through they're going to become what's called urea, which is basically like amino acids mixed with water. Goes into your kidneys, and your body's going to pee that out. That's where we get urine from. When we're looking at that, right, that's one of the things that we kind of need to remember. Too much amino acids, your body either just turns it into glucose, takes the remainders, and it becomes urea, or it just pees it out in general, right? It's one of the reasons why they look for too much protein in your urine if you're having health problems. They're basically checking to see, are you using protein and are you taxing your digestive system? Now, from there, we've got our vitamins and minerals, right? Vitamins and minerals. These don't need to be broken down. They are just absorbable as is, right? But you've got the water-soluble type and you've got the fat-soluble type. Water-soluble, those are the ones that are going to get transported in water and then they're going to dissolve in water, right? So your B vitamins and your vitamin C. This is one of the reasons why if you look at like a vitamin supplement nutrition facts panel, just get a good picture here. A lot of times you'll look at like some of these things and you'll see, where's a good example? Kind of cherry picking my examples here. Yeah, look at this. So you'll take a look here, like at this vitamin, and it's like, all right, this is vitamin B12. This supplement has 2,000% the recommended daily value. Now, how the heck is that not going to make you sick? Because you can get sick from too many vitamins. Why isn't that making you sick? For the most part, guys, it's a water-soluble vitamin. When your body gets too much water-soluble stuff, it just pees it out. It's one of the reasons why when you take a vitamin, your urine looks like bright yellow. It looks like highlighter fluid. And you're like, what happened to my pee? That's all the extra vitamin B basically coming out because your body's like, okay, we need this. The rest just to the bladder, you know. And that's what happens with all the extra stuff. So for the most part, too much water soluble vitamins really doesn't bother you. But if you look at the rest of this, right, if you look at like vitamin A, for instance, you'll notice it only has about 100% the recommended value. It doesn't go super, super high. And that's because your fat soluble vitamins can get stored in your fat for long-term storage. And then if you have fat in your diet, you're going to absorb them very easily and they're going to stay in your body because we have a lot of fat tissue in our body. That can make you sick. Too much of any vitamin really can. You get too much of the water-soluble stuff, your body can handle it. It just pees out. You get too much of the fat soluble stuff, it kind of gets stuck in the body because we have so much fat, right? And then that can start causing problems. Too much vitamin A can cause like skin problems. Too much vitamin D can cause calcium problems. Too much vitamin E can also cause skin problems and keep you from blood clotting. Too much vitamin K can cause you to overclot. You know, it's a lot of weird problems that come along that. Don't be afraid of getting too many vitamins in your diet, guys. This is a really rare thing that happens, but I do want to mention it because it is possible. And then we've also got our minerals. Minerals are inorganic substances. Your electrolytes are good examples of that. Where am I at? You know, sodium, potassium, they help our body generate those electric charges that I was talking about. So that's the whole process of digestion, absorption. In review, I know we've already kind of talked a lot about all that. Anything I said today that was confusing that you got that was new info? Anybody have any questions so far? All righty. We are moving fast. All right. Well, next one we've got our energy metabolism, right? So let's go ahead and review that really quick. What do we metabolize, guys? What's our energy sources? Proteins, fats, and carbs. Now, we don't like using proteins. We're going to talk about why in just a second, but carbs are one of our favorites. And then fat can also be metabolized really well for energy as well, right? So when we're referring to someone's metabolism, we're talking about like the total amount of energy that runs their body. It's a little bit of a different definition than I've given you in the past. A lot of times when I say metabolism, I'm talking about any chemical process, right? Well, your body runs on chemical processes. So it's the total amount of energy. So when we're talking about metabolism to our clients, we use a slightly different definition. It's like, hey, this is how much energy you need per day, which is sort of the more colloquial client version of the word metabolism, right? So when we're measuring that, we measure it in our basal metabolic rate. This is the minimum amount of energy required to keep you alive, right? This is sometimes also referred to your resting metabolic rate. It's the minimum amount of energy at rest. So there is a slight difference between BMR and RMR, but because you have to measure RMR in a perfectly at-rest state, you literally need somebody to be unconscious for like 24 straight hours to be able to measure it. So it's not something that we actually like truly ever use, because I don't know about you guys, but I'm not going to put my client into a coma for a day, you know? So we use the estimated version, which is the BMR. Unfortunately, so many people know that these definitions are kind of interchangeable, that the definition has kind of gotten muddled over the years. So if you ever see BMR or RMR, they are the same thing essentially. Scientifically, they are different, but in the world that we live in, the way we use it, they're kind of interchangeable, okay? And it's how many calories you burn at baseline. So for me, for instance, let's go ahead and I'll use myself as an example, BMR calculator here. I'm going to go ahead and click this. I am 34 years old. I am 6'1", and I weigh about 100 and actually about 70 right now, 170 pounds, right? So if I hit calculate, I burn about 1,765 calories daily at basal energy by existing, essentially, right? So I need to be able to create that much energy plus more, because obviously I'm living my life. Even if I'm sedentary, I would burn more than that, you know, probably about closer to 2,200 a day. If I'm really active, probably closer to about 2,800 a day, right? So I need to be able to get enough calories from my food to release that energy, about 2,800 calories worth, and convert it into a type of energy that I can use. That energy is going to be ATP. So our metabolic pathways are taking ATP, that's the triphosphate, kicking that third phosphate off, there's the energy from my food, right? And I'm left with ADP. And then if you ever have to, your body can actually break ADP down, although it's not very efficient, and you're left with AMP. So inside of a cell, you've got the cell membrane, which keeps everything, you know, keeps water out and water in, because that water is very important. That's your cytoplasm, the fluid inside of your cells where we produce glycolysis, right? And then there's another organelle in there as well, the mitochondria, right? Mitochondria is going to spit out a lot of energy using the byproducts of the first system, that glycolysis, right? So proteins, fats, and carbs are going to come in to, let's say, a muscle cell, for instance, right? And they're first going to go through the anaerobic energy system. That's using glycolysis, right? It can also use a little bit of the phosphagen system there. And then that glycolysis is going to also go into the aerobic system. Now, you'll notice carbohydrates are going into both, right? Anaerobic and aerobic. But fats and proteins really only go through the aerobic side of things. And that's why they are not our favorite source of energy. Our body prefers carbohydrates. It can produce energy in all systems, right? So we start with the phosphagen system, which is really not creating any new ATP. It's just using creatine to reattach a phosphate, which gives us energy super fast, because it's like, nope, boom, I break it off and I'm like, nope, put that back on. Boom, and I break it off, put that back on, like, and you just get a big explosion of energy, but it only lasts about 5 to 10 seconds. That's, the really heavy lifting. Then we got our anaerobic system, which is like major sprinting, working real hard, right? And then we've got our aerobic system. Aerobic system is going to help us like break down energy low and slow over like a really long period of time. So if we look at the phosphagen system, it's not very complex. It's really simple, actually, and it creates energy really fast. You look at the anaerobic system, that's glycolysis. That's moderately complicated, but it produces energy really fast. Then you look at the aerobic system, and it's like, oh my gosh, the Krebs cycle, all those little enzymes, it's so complicated, right? And it creates energy very, very slowly. So when you look at like your capacity to create energy, the phosphagen system's super limited. It's simple, it's fast, doesn't last very long. The anaerobic system, that's glycolysis, is somewhat limited. And it really only, makes ATP in a couple seconds, right? And then the aerobic system is essentially unlimited energy. You've got all this fat stored on your body, right? So it can produce energy really, really slowly with enough, as long as there is enough oxygen coming in. So the aerobic system creates a lot of ATP very, very, very slowly. And that's why cardio is like a long, sort of low intensity, high duration type of exercise, right? And there's that chart that we've seen before. Phosphagen system dies off really fast. And then glycolysis is like, I got it, but then it also kind of dies off. And then eventually you've got this like low, slow aerobic energy, and you can basically stay up there for forever, as long as you're getting enough oxygen and as long as you have enough fat on your body, which, trust me, even if you were at like 4% body fat, you've got hundreds of thousands worth of calories. So when we're looking at like metabolizing these things and using that energy to either make new parts of us or break down foods and stuff, we've got either anabolic, not anaerobic, but anabolic pathways. Anabolic requires a lot of energy to make new stuff. It's why you have to be in a calorie surplus in order to gain weight. You have to eat more energy than you are expending every day. And then your catabolic pathway takes stuff and breaks stuff down. This is why we have to lose weight by being in an energy deficit. I need to eat less than I'm consuming. So we go back to my BMR calculations here. If I want to gain, let's say I'm exercising every day pretty intensely, I'm burning like 2,700 calories a day. So if I want to gain weight, I need to eat more than that. I need to eat probably 3,000, 3,200 a day. If I'm trying to lose weight, maybe I can eat only 2,500 a day. And then my body's like, hey, I need 200 calories worth of energy. What the heck? Where am I going to get it from? You know what? I'm going to go to the stomach, and it's going to burn up any of that stored energy that I have, right? And that's how weight loss and weight gain actually work. So when you look at anabolic reactions, they take energy, right? Making glycogen is anabolic. Making triglycerides, even making fat, it's anabolic. Making protein is definitely anabolic. And then catabolic reactions are breaking things down, right? Glycogen becomes glucose, becomes energy. Triglycerides become fatty acids, it becomes energy. Protein becomes amino acids become glucose, glucose becomes energy. That one is roundabout and we don't like to do it. And then there's just a bunch of pictures of, at the very end here, this is all pictures actually. And you can see like glucose gets broken down, becomes the pyruvate, ferments into lactic acid, right? Then the lactic acid becomes acetyl-CoA and then goes through this crazy Krebs cycle, complicated nonsense. And then eventually all that gets squeezed together in the electron transport chain to become even more energy. So that is a review of everything we've already talked about. Here's what I like about this PowerPoint. It is basically the Cliff Notes version of everything we've mentioned until now, and it summarizes things really well. This page of notes is probably my favorite page of notes, like if you were to try to use this on your nutrition exam. And so I like it's just summarized everything and just kind of put it all together in one big thing, but it didn't necessarily mention anything new today. Which is why, honestly, it moves really quick. I mean, we didn't have any questions, and we already kind of know all this stuff. Any questions or comments today, guys? You get anybody worried about anything? That's honestly about all I got for you.
Nope, all good over here.
I'm good?
Yep.
Yeah? Kelvin, Israel, Panuka, Freddie, Gerald, Max, Mariella, how you guys feeling? Got thumbs up?
I'm feeling good.
I'm good. I'm good.
Cool.
All good on this side. All good.
Now, here's a fun question. For my first modders, do you feel more confident about this stuff now that you've heard it a million times? Like, I was moving fast today, but do you feel like you're like, I kind of know all that? A little bit?
It honestly helps that you're like going over it redundantly or whatever.
Right? I like it because it makes you feel confident. I love when someone starts saying something and I'm like, I already know this. I already know what he's talking. Like, cool. Well, heck. All right, we'll go ahead and excellent. All right. Well, I'll let you guys all out of here. And some of you coming tonight, I'll see you tonight. And the other guys, rest of who's not, I will see you tomorrow.
All right. Thank you for your time, Red.
Yeah, of course. Great job today, guys.
Thank you. Bye. Have a good day.
See ya.